I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay and that we can all see my screen. Someone could just give me a quick heads up, letting me know if that's the case. That'd be fantastic.
I can hear you loud and clear, Sean.
All right, it's perfect. All right, folks. So yeah, today we're basically going to be talking about retainer and recurring billing. So how do we use the function point system most efficiently when it comes down to those recurring jobs that we're going through each month? And some different ways that we can make sure the system is organized in such a way that you're going to be able to pull that information and action it. Now, throughout the course of this, guys, there should be a little chat dialog box that you guys can throw your questions into. So please be sure to throw those in there as they come up. If there's any sort of questions that we can't get to during the webinar, please rest assured we will make sure that we keep track of all those and we'll get back to you with an answer as soon as we possibly can. Now, a brief little rundown of what we're covering today. We're going to go through some basics in terms of how you organize your jobs. So, a big part of retainer and recurring billing is, how do we make sure we can find that information in the system? How do we action it? Now, a big part of that is going to be making sure that jobs are organized in such a way that we can quickly pop into the system, get a list of things that we need to invoice, and then quickly send those out. So we'll be touching on that. Kind of moving on from that, we're going to be going through just some invoicing basics. So how do you do invoicing off of your jobs? Fairly straightforward. Then we'll get through to some of the more advanced steps. So doing some multi-batch invoicing, some multi-job invoicing for a single batch of jobs, as well as some batch invoicing for multiple clients. And again, if there's any questions that come up, folks, please do let me know, and we'll make sure that we get to those as quickly as possible. Now, in order for me to go through this, I'm going to pull up a demo system here. So if you guys can just bear with me for 1 second here. And hopefully you can all see my function point system here. Perfect. All right, so let's start off with how we keep our jobs organized. Now, in order to do that, I'm not sure if some of you present in the webinar were here a couple weeks ago for our retainer best practices webinar, but I'm actually going to use a few of the examples that we'd set up for that for this session. So to quickly start off here, I'm going to move over to my projects module in the system, and I'm going to do just a view project, and these were some of the last ones that we were working on. Now, I'm going to pull up just a very simple retainer here. So my Safeway Simple SEO SLA for service level agreement, because you got to love that alliteration. And let's take a look at first how this project is organized. So I can see I've got my project level folder here under the company Safeway, and a couple key things to note. My project type is set for retainer. We want to make sure when we're setting these projects up that we do classify this as retainer, because this gives us a very simple way to search in the system to pull up the relevant data. And I'll show you what that actually looks like. If I go to my projects module and I click on the find project, I can take this type field here and I can actually move right down, select retainer, and find projects. Now this is going to pull all of my retainers in the system, all of my projects that are classified as retainer. If I go ahead and click into this actual project, which is where we just were, I can take this one step further. If I take a look at the jobs themselves, in this case, it should just be a single simple retainer. I can see that my job type here is actually set for retainer as well. So again, if I wanted to go that one level deeper, if I do my job find, and I sort by my job type, in this case, again, I'm choosing retainer. I can pull up a list of all the different jobs that I have classified in my system as retainer. Now, this might not seem to have a lot of context yet. Please bear with me. I do promise you this is going to make a lot more sense once we start invoicing off of this. Now, if I click into this Safeway SEO job, and again, I've done that by just doing a job find or a project find based on the type of retainer, and I take a look at my financials, I can see I've got a very simple setup here. I've got one line item that I track my time to, and one line item that I'm going to be invoicing off of. In terms of invoicing here, it's going to be $1,000 each month, and I can see that set using my estimate column here. Now, to very simply and quickly invoice off of this, I just need to pull into this job, select Add New, select Add Invoice, and I'm going to calculate from my estimated value, because as we saw, my estimated value in this case is $1,000. I'm going to make sure I set this as interim, because I'm going to be invoicing off of this over and over again each month. And most importantly, I'm going to make sure my invoice date is set to either the end of the month, if I'm billing for work that I've already completed, or if I'm billing in advance, I'm going to want to make sure I set my invoice date to the beginning of the month. So let's go through the example here and bill for this job for February. I'm actually going to just cancel out of this and just start this from scratch here. So on this simple retainer job, meaning I've got a single line that I'm invoicing $1,000 a month for in advance, I'm going to select my Add New button, Add Invoice. I'm going to keep this set as interim, and I'm going to make sure my date is set for February 1st. I'm going to calculate from my estimated amount just to make sure that I'm pulling through that $1,000. And I'm going to select Add Invoice. Now for this specific job, I can see my invoiced amount is pulled through for $1,000. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And if I was running this through QuickBooks, at this point, I would more than likely post it and sync it over. Now what this has actually done, folks, if I take a look at the job itself now and move back to the financials, because this is a simple setup, we're really collecting all the information for the entire year on this single line. Now that's all fine and good. It gives us a really basic way to run this job and to run these invoices. But if I need to drill down month to month and see how this is doing, I'm going to make sure I use these start and end filters. So I'm focusing right now on February. So I'm going to set my start date to February 1. My end date to February 28, and I'm going to select filter by date. Now what this is giving me is a very solid target to work against for the month of February. I can see I've got 10 hours that I should put into this. I know that 10 hours should be worth $1,000. I've not put any time into it yet, so I've got no cost associated or no actuals. I do have an invoiced amount of $1,000. So as I'm working through this month, at the end of the month, my actuals column, ideally, is going to work out to be the same as my invoice column. Okay, folks, I'm going to pause right here for a moment to see if there's any questions that have popped up so far.
Hi, Sean. No questions so far. We're all good.
All right, perfect. Okay, now let's go through a more robust example for this. And again, I'm going to go back to my projects module here. And again, this kind of comes back to the organization of our jobs. So I'm going to do a sort by my type of retainer.
Sean. Sean, your screen's not showing.
Interesting. Thank you,
So right now we're just, okay. There we go.
Now? Perfect.
Excellent.
So folks, let me go through that one more time. I'm going to go back to the projects module here, do a project find. And again, like I said, with the organization of those jobs, we want to make sure we sort by the type. We're going to pull up retainer. Perfect. And I'm going to take a look at one of my robust retainers. So let me go ahead and click into this. Perfect. And I will take a look at the job financials on this. Now, again, a quick little review of how we had this structured. In this case, we have a billing line on this job, so a specific billing job called retainer services. I've got 100 hours that I'm willing to spend for this client each month, giving me a total bill out value of $10,000. I can see actuals that have gone into this month, actual monetary figure that's gone into this month, and I can see what I've invoiced thus far. Now, exactly the same as we did last time, folks, with the exception of, because this job is broken out into two separate pieces, I'm going to go through my invoicing routine in a very similar manner, but instead of invoicing on the work that I'm actually doing here, so my work is all being tracked to this website tracking job, I'm going to invoice off of this overall invoicing job. So if I go ahead and click into this retainer services piece, I'm going to move up, select add new. I'm going to select add invoice. And again, I'm going to keep this set as interim, specifically because I'm going to invoice in advance for this. I'm going to continue invoicing on this job right throughout the total length of this contract. And I'm just going to make sure I set my invoice date to the beginning of February, because again, I'm invoicing in advance for the work that I'm going to do throughout the month of February. My calculate from field is staying exactly the same. And I'm just going to go ahead and select add invoice. Perfect. Now in this case, again, I can see that my invoice amount is $10,000, which is pulling from that estimated amount. I'm going to go ahead and click on the save here. And again, if I was using QuickBooks, I would post this over. If not, I'm just going to take a look at the overall financials on this project for the month of February. So using these filters in the job financials section, selecting February 1 as my start, February 28 as my end, and hitting filter by date. Now in this case, I can see I've got some old invoices in here. So I've got my 20 grand. I've got my 100 hours target time to work against for the month, my estimated amount of $10,000, and then I can see what has been accrued thus far in terms of my invoices. Now, something that's really important to note with these retainers, especially if we're going with more of this robust style, if we take a look at the project details here, what we ideally want to see here, folks, at the end of the year is that this invoice total amount, this should be equaling up to our overall budget. Our actual total amount should be equaling up to our overall budget as well. So as long as we're being consistent with how we invoice off of this, we should have a nice match with all these three figures here. Okay, and again, I'll take a quick little pause here, folks, just to make sure there's no questions that have popped up.
Hi, Sean. Right now, we just have one question from Matthew. It's what about keeping schedules and tasks organized by month?
Perfect. Matthew, that's a great question. I'm actually going to go into that with this next example I show you here. So we do have a third sort of retainer structure in the system, which is a month-to-month structure. So let me just pull this one up for you. Okay. So in this case, folks, I've got a retainer set up on a month-to-month basis. Now, me personally, this is probably my favorite way to run these retainers, because this does give me the ability to keep schedules as well as tasks in a very clear manner on a month-to-month basis. So if I'm taking a look at this overall project setup, again, I can see my project type here is retainer. So if I had to do a search for this, I would be able to see it. My jobs are set up on a monthly basis, January, February, and March. And within these jobs, I can see that I've got different pieces or different services that I might be tracking to. So if I have them set up in this manner, oops, sorry, folks. What I can do here is actually have a separate schedule for each one of these. So in this case, I've got my schedule for February. This is based on the services for the month of February. And I can essentially templatize this. So as long as I had my first schedule created for that month of January, then I can apply that schedule to each month moving forward. And that's going to give me the ability to manage each of these individual jobs using an individual schedule. And it's going to give me a lot of flexibility in terms of how I actually push this out to different people in my organization. Now, the invoicing for this is exactly the same as it is in the other examples, with the exception that we're going to issue final invoices here, because we do have it set up in a month-to-month basis. So if I was invoicing for January, for instance, I would click into January. I can see my estimated total is still at $10,000, so I can still calculate from the estimated amounts. But I would set this to final just so it actually closes out my job for me for January. So let me just go ahead and click onto this add invoice here. And I'll just move back to my overall project details just so we can see how that looks in terms of the financial piece. Perfect. So I can see here that I have indeed invoiced for my January amounts. And again, if I'm taking a look at this overall sort of project level view, I can see that I do now have invoice totals in here for $10,000. If I was invoicing in advance, again, it would be the same routine. So I'd select my February job. The only difference here is that I would make sure that I'm setting my invoice to an interim type just so it stays open. And then at the end of the month, I would want to make sure that I close this job out just by changing my status. Now, Matthew, to follow on from your point there, I'm not sure if this was what you were getting at, but it's certainly an extra step that we can take. If we are going to be kind of using this month-to-month setup so we can use a schedule, what I would probably recommend, and this is probably good advice for everybody, is that at the end of the schedule, so possibly the last task that we actually issue or the first task that we issue, let me just pull back to this other view, sorry folks. I might want to consider actually setting myself a task on this schedule to create the invoices for this job. So if I go ahead and click on a plus task, and I probably want this just to be sitting someplace else other than my video production category. Let me just drag this up. I can just simply set a task for invoicing, a assign this to myself. And depending on when I was doing my invoicing, if I was at the beginning of the month or the end of the month, I would set those dates right here. So again, if we're doing a month-to-month setup, we can set these tasks in here on the monthly basis, and it gives us a really kind of clean way to notify us in the system that we actually need to invoice for this. It just kind of helps us to make sure things don't get lost. Okay, Matt, hopefully that's answered your question there. It looks like we have a couple extra questions that have popped through here, so I'll take a quick pause to go through some of these. Okay, so Alex, you're asking about, because we're billing through the retainer services job, how do timesheets get marked as billed on the website job? That's a fantastic question. Usually what I recommend for that is, and that would be part of the retainer maintenance for this, we might want to consider doing a timesheet find for the work that has gone into it for that month. And then we can actually manually mark those timesheets as billed. That's probably going to be the cleanest way for us to do it. There might be some other potential things we could do with that. So Alex, maybe what we'll do is touch base with you after the session and go through a couple of those examples. Okay, and let's see here, I got one from Jeff. Pre-billing for expenses such as media costs, is it better to use a deposit rather than interim since you do not have any invoices received for the costs? I have seen some people do that, use the deposit type. It certainly does make it easy because you can apply that again to the costs as they come in. Now, the issue that I do see with that is that because that money is sitting as unrecognized revenue on your accounting piece, it can get a little bit muddy when we do start to throw those expenses in and try to pull those totals through. We'd essentially have to issue 2 invoices a month off that. So maybe not exactly maybe not exactly the best way to go about it. Jeff, that might be something that, again, we might want to take that offline, have a discussion with your CSM about that. I have seen some people do it effectively, but we just have to keep in mind if we are doing that, chances are we're going to have to issue a second invoice throughout the month just to pull that deposit amount through. Okay. And from Nadia, we don't have to add an estimate for the retainer if we create a project. Nadia, we do. Everything in the system starts with an estimate. The reason why I use the project, and if you guys have been around for some of the webinars that we've done previously, we might not necessarily have had that step for the project in there. I'm not sure if that's more of a personal quirk of mine. I personally find organizing them under a project, even if it's a simple retainer, just to give a bit more clarity in the system, because with that project level, let me just pull up this simple example here. If we organize it under that project level, we can throw an overall sort of contracted value for the retainer at this project level. We can't necessarily throw that on the estimate level. You could, but it makes invoicing a little bit more difficult because you would basically be having to take the overall project amount, so 12,000 in this case, figure out what percentage that would be on a monthly basis, which would probably work out to, well, math is terrible. I'm gonna say it's like 7.333 repeating, I think it is. You'd have to try to calculate that when you're invoicing off of the estimated amount. So it basically you're adding an extra step for yourself. If you add this at the project level, then again, when we're doing our invoicing, we can keep the estimated value just based on the month. And then again, we've got a really clean way to actually invoice this instead of us having to calculate what percentage that monthly total should be of the overall contracted value. Okay, folks, now moving on from here. So we've seen 3 sort of examples, 3 examples of how retainers are set up and ways that we can actually invoice off of those. that's all fine and good if we're going through just on a kind of individual basis. So we're taking a look at each job individually and then invoicing from there. Now there might be something that comes up where we have, sort of one customer in the system that happens to have multiple retainers running at the same time, and we just want to issue a single invoice for all of the work that client is doing. Now the system can accommodate that using what's known as a batch invoice. So again, I'm going to do a quick project find here based on my retainer type. So again, wrapping it back to how we keep these things organized. So sorting by the type retainer. And Safeway looks like a perfect example here. So I've got quite a few Safeway retainers set up in the system here. If I wanted to issue just a single invoice for all of their retainer type jobs, I can do that. Now, the way that I'm going to go about getting here is I'm going to click into just one of these retainers. And I'm actually going to move back to the company level Safeway here. And I'm going to take a look at all the jobs that I currently have sitting under this. Now I can see I've got a few that are set up, again, organized as retainer. And I'm actually going to kick off my invoice process from this company level rather than kicking it off from the individual job like I've done in the past. So if I go ahead and select Add New, Add Invoice, because I'm at the company level, folks, I've got this ability to choose single multi-job invoice. So what that means is I'm going to invoice for quite a few different jobs here, but it's going to tie them all up onto a single page that I can send out to that customer. Now I'm going to bill in advance for my jobs here. So I'm going to select February 1st as my time. Again, I'm going to keep this set as interim. And I'm going to make sure that I'm calculating from my estimated amount, because again, the way I have these retainers set up, my estimated value for each of those jobs is referencing what I'm charging on a monthly basis. So I'm just going to go ahead and select Add Invoice. Now this is going to take me through to our Invoice Wizard screen. Usually what I recommend if we're throwing anything in here at all, folks, is just a simple description. Okay, so I've got a very simple description in here, monthly billing for retained services. And then I'm going to choose to add certain jobs to this piece. So in this case, I'm going to choose my retainer. And I've got another retainer services piece here. And my SEO job. Okay, so once I've chosen which ones I want to include, I can actually pull into the individual jobs here. And if I needed to make any adjustments, I could. People always ask, if I'm batching these together, do I have the ability to make individual adjustments to invoices? You do. You just need to make sure you're pointed in the right place. So if you click into the jobs on this batch invoice that you've created, you can edit each individual piece. So maybe, for some reason, we had to invoice a little bit less for this month. I can actually pull into that invoice and then just type whatever amount it is that I choose to invoice for that month. Now, once this has been created, folks, it's exactly the same as what our normal process would be. If we wanted to push this over to QuickBooks, we would post it. Otherwise, if I just take a look at these jobs now, let me show you the printout here. So I can see that's wrapped those 3 different retainer pieces up onto a single invoice for me. But now if I wanted to take a look at these individual jobs, I can see that invoice has indeed tracked to this individual piece. So it's a bit of a time saver. As long as we've got these things organized correctly, then we have the ability to issue that sort of overall batch instead of us having to invoice off each individual piece. Okay. Oh, great.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, Carrie.
At some point, if you could show Jean an actual printout of an invoice would be awesome.
Perfect. Okay, Jean. So again, if I just take a look at this B162, that's the batch invoice that we just created here. And if I just select my print option, you can see I've got invoice multi-job printout copy. So this is just a very basic one. So I can see my description is pulled through, monthly billing for retained services. And then I've just got single lines for each of those jobs here. Now it looks like we have an expanded version here as well. So if I go ahead and select this, it looks like it's giving us the exact same information. So that's a bit embarrassing, folks, but let me just see what we currently have in here. So folks, I'm just in my print preferences right now. So with these sort of printouts, we generally do have the ability to add more to these if we need to. Now in this case, I do have some expanded summaries that I could add to this. There are a few other printout types, or not printout types, setups we can use for this multi-job. So it really just kind of comes down to what you'd be looking for. So Jean, might be a little bit difficult to go back and forth with this. But if we wanted to jump on a call with yourself and one of the CSMs, or if you wanted to email us over what you might be looking for in terms of what's populated on that printout, I'm sure we could come up with something that will get you what you're looking for. Okay, so Jean, yeah, it looks like the description for services shows up. You didn't want this to happen. That's a fairly easy fix. So again, we'll have your CSM reach out to you, and this should be something that we could remedy pretty quickly for you. Okay, folks. Now, there is one other way that we can look at this batch invoicing as well. And again, this can be a real time saver. What this situation would be is if we have quite a few clients that are on retainer with us, obviously not all one individual clients. This would be multiple different clients that we have retainer setups for. There is a way that we can actually issue invoices for all of them at the same time as well. And again, it kind of circles back to making sure that we have the correct organization of those jobs. Organization in this case being, are they classified as a retainer type job? So if I move to my jobs module here and I click on the find job, I'm going to use my job type field and I'm going to move down and select retainer as the filter I'm sorting by. Great. Now in this case, I can see again, Safeway's popping up here. You can tell that we all have a big love for Safeway. Great cafe there. I've also got some jobs for North Shore Auto Group, and I've got Company A. Now in this case, I know I've got a few different companies here, but I still want to invoice all of these at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and select Add Invoice. Again, I'm going to make sure I invoice from Interim here, just so those jobs will stay open for us. I'm going to pretend I'm billing in advance here. So again, I'm going to set my date for February 1st. If I was just tying up for the end of the month, then I'd make sure that I set my invoice date to January 31st. I'm going to pull from my estimated amounts. And again, I'm going to go ahead and select Add Batch Invoice. Similar setup to last time, folks. I'm going to make sure I type in my description. Monthly billing for retainer services. And in this case, I'm going to select, again, this first retained job for Safeway, my SEO work for Safeway, my straight retainer services, my February retainer, and this launch and research retainer for Company A. So once I've got the jobs selected that I want to include in this batch, I'm going to select Finish Adding to Batch. And again, if I needed to adjust any one of these individually, like in this case, this retained job here, I can select into it. And I'll notice that I have an invoice line. Sorry, I've got a 0 value invoice here because I didn't have any estimated amounts for some reason. So here I could type in, usually in a line like research or account services, what it was that I was billing. So I'm going to go ahead and type my 1,000 in there. And now in this case, I do have a deposit that's been applied to this. So if I wanted to pull a bit from that, kind of coming back to that question about, if we do have media expenses, I can pull some of that away from this. Now, the great thing about this too is that if I select this batch piece here, I see I've got a little column here called Notify. If I'm to select these different pieces here, as long as I've got a contact and then I hit Notify Selected, what this will do is actually individually send out invoices to each of these different contacts that I have. With something to the effect of this piece here. So however I have that job set up, it will send through an individualized invoice to each of those different customers. So instead of me, again, having to go through each individual retainer project, each individual billing job, I can just do this all from one screen. Okay, folks, now let's see if there's any other questions here.
We have a question there from Matthew. Is there a way to send from emails for those invoices as they come in from Function Point? So, or do they come from invoice at Function Point? So he's really kind of wondering where they're coming from if we're actually notifying clients of invoices.
Gotcha. Yep. So I believe the invoice, and Matthew, I'd have to take a look into this with you. We've looked into this a few times. It comes from the Function Point system, so it's something at functionpoint.com. However, it does, I believe, have an alias applied to it. So I think it shows up as your name when it goes through. The actual email address, that's something that we'd have to look into with the tech team. So again, that's something we can get your CSM to go through with you as well.
It is a no reply function point. You do. You have necessary.
Okay, and can you include multiple contacts per client when sending in bulk? That is a good question. That I honestly do not know, Matthew. That I'll have to check into. I believe with the batch, I think it's a single invoice or a single contact. I don't want to give you 100% no on that though, because I do obviously want to check into that. With the individual ones, you can do that CC. But I believe because it's dealing with so many different invoices, I think it just looks for that main sort of contact when it sends it out. But I can certainly check into that for you. Okay, folks. So some great questions have come through with this. So the ones that we weren't able to get to today, like I said, we can have the CSMs or your customer success managers reach out to you. Certainly, Matthew will get in touch about where those emails are coming from and just kind of how that looks and to see if there is the ability to have those extra contacts on there. And Jean will make sure that your CSM reaches out to you as well. But before we finish off for the day, was there any sort of last minute questions that we wanted to address?
I have one more here from Matthew, and it was about batch changing job statuses after invoicing.
Sure. So if we set that, if we set the invoice type over to final when we do that invoice, that'll automatically change all of those job statuses to invoiced. Now that might not be the best thing for us, specifically because that will close those jobs out. So what I'd probably recommend, Matthew, is that if we are doing these batch invoices, let me just pull that demo system back up one more time.
And part of that batch invoicing question, I have another question from Nadia while you're pulling that one up. Is she's wondering, I need to also know how to batch notify clients if it's more than one contact.
Yeah, so that's batch invoice if it's more than one contact. That is something that we will look into. So that was a similar question to what Matt asked. So I'll take a look at how we can do that. It will notify an individual contact from each company. If we have multiple contacts on the company that might need to be notified, that I need to check into, folks. So we'll hopefully have an answer for you relatively soon with that.
Thanks, Sean.
No problem. Now again, with the with the job statuses, if we wanted everything to automatically close out, if we'd issue that final invoice type, it'll automatically change to invoiced for us. Now, if we had a different status that we need to change things to, what I'd probably recommend is that we did a job find, again, based on that last criteria. So if you'd set them by job type equaling retainer, we'd pull that exact last search up, and then we'd use our editable list view on the job find. Now, it's not exactly a batch status update, but if I use this editable list view, you see I can actually quickly click into the status column on each one of these. And I can very, very quickly change these to whatever sort of status I have set in the system. So it's certainly a time saver. Again, instead of you having to manually move into each job and then change that status, you can do it from the one screen. And again, that's your job find and then editable list view. Okay, folks, were there any other questions for today then?
I'm just looking at the last one from Nadia here. Just give me 1 second. They've never used project-based invoicing for retainer and would appreciate it. Oh, I will have, Nadia, I'll have your CSM follow up with you with regards to your invoicing.
I don't think so, but I will ask.
Okay, folks. So looks like there will be some, looks like there'll definitely be some reach outs taking place here. So some of the CSMs will be reaching out to you guys individually. Please make sure you keep attending these webinars. There's lots of good tips and tricks that, oftentimes, either we forget about or because there is so much to learn in the system, they can be easily missed. So please keep attending these. Also note that each of you will have a CSM that's assigned to you. So should any questions arise outside of these sessions, never be afraid to send us a quick email to either your consultant's individual email address or simply to success@functionpoint.com. And please stay tuned for the next session that we have, which will be invoicing, fixed price, and time and materials. And that'll be on February 21st. All right, folks, thank you all so much for your time today. And like I said, your individual CSMs should be reaching out to you. And I believe these are recorded as well. So you guys should have access to the recording of the session as well.